She was just a poor barista who gave a free cup of coffee to a sad stranger. But she never imagined that one small act of kindness would completely change her life forever. Stay with us till the end. You won't believe the twist. The sun had barely risen when Sophia pulled on her worn-out shoes and tied her apron around her waist. Another day at the small corner cafe awaited her. The streets were still quiet, painted grey by the early morning drizzle, and the buses rumbled by carrying workers to jobs they didn't always love. Sophia clutched her umbrella, protecting herself from the light rain as she walked briskly toward the cafe. She had been working there for almost 2 years, and though the pay was barely enough to survive, it was the only job she could get after leaving college to support her younger brother. The cafe itself wasn't anything fancy, just a modest little shop with wooden tables, faded menus, and a glass display filled with croissants and muffins that often went unsold by the end of the day. Yet Sophia had made the place feel warm with her cheerful energy. She remembered almost every customer by name, from the elderly man who always ordered tea with extra honey to the school teacher who came in before classes. People liked her not because of the cafe's food or decor, but because she made them feel seen even in the rush of their day. Still, when she was alone behind the counter, she couldn't hide the truth from herself. Business was slowing down. The owner had been talking about selling the cafe for months, muttering about how expenses were climbing while sales dropped lower each week. Sophia overheard conversations she wished she hadn't, about closing down, about firing staff. She was only 22, but the thought of losing her job kept her awake at night. She wasn't just working for herself. She was the only one paying rent for the tiny apartment where she lived with her younger brother, Daniel, who was still in school. Her parents had passed away years earlier, leaving her in charge. Some nights, she sat by the window counting the last few coins in her wallet, wondering how long she could keep pretending everything was fine. On that particular morning, the rain was steady. Customers were slow to arrive. She prepared the counter as usual, polishing cups, brewing the first pot of coffee, wiping down the wooden surface. She told herself that today would be better, though she didn't really believe it. Around mid-morning, the door creaked open and a man walked in. He wasn't one of their usual customers. He looked to be in his 30s, tall, well-groomed, wearing a tailored jacket that instantly made him stand out in the humble shop. But what caught Sophia's attention wasn't his clothes, it was his expression. His eyes were tired, distant, filled with something heavier than simple fatigue. He walked up to the counter quietly, as though every step carried weight. "1 black coffee, please," he said softly. Sophia nodded, preparing it quickly. She noticed how he kept glancing outside, as if searching for something in the rain. His hands fidgeted slightly on the counter, tapping nervously. She set the steaming cup in front of him, but then he paused, reaching into his pocket. A look of discomfort crossed his face. He patted one pocket, then another, then the inside of his jacket. Finally, he gave a strained sigh. I don't have my wallet with me," he muttered, almost embarrassed. "I'm sorry. I must have left it somewhere." Most baristas might have taken the cup back or insisted that he couldn't have it without payment. After all, rules were rules, and the cafe couldn't afford to give things away. But Sophia saw something in his face, the quiet desperation, the loneliness he tried to hide. For reasons she couldn't explain, her heart softened. "It's okay," she said gently, pushing the coffee toward him. "This one's on me." The man looked at her in surprise. "Are you sure?" She nodded, smiling in the way she always did when she wanted someone to feel at ease. "Yes, everyone needs a coffee sometimes. Don't worry about it." For a brief moment his eyes changed. The sadness was still there, but it was joined by something else, gratitude, maybe even relief. He took the cup carefully, as if it were more than just a drink. "Thank you," he whispered, before moving to sit by the window. Sophia went back to her work, pretending not to watch him, though she couldn't help glancing every few minutes. He sat still for a long time, holding the cup, staring out at the rain. It was as though the world outside was moving, but he wasn't part of it. She wondered what kind of man he was, What kind of problems made someone like him, who clearly looked successful, appear so broken? As the hours passed, more customers came and went. She served them all, smiling, joking, remembering orders without being asked. But her mind kept wandering back to the stranger by the window. Something about him unsettled her, not in a dangerous way, but in the sense that she felt his sadness more deeply than she wanted to. When the cafe finally quieted down again, she noticed he was still there, though his coffee had long gone cold. He seemed lost in thought, perhaps not even realizing how much time had passed. Eventually he stood, leaving the empty cup neatly on the table. As he headed for the door, he looked back at her once more, as though he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. Then he left, stepping out into the rain with his coat pulled tightly around him. Sophia exhaled slowly. She told herself not to think about it too much. Customers came and went all the time. But something about that man lingered in her mind. She had no way of knowing then that this small act of kindness, a single free cup of coffee, would set into motion events that would change her entire life. She returned to wiping the counter, humming softly to distract herself. Outside, the rain kept falling, washing the streets clean, carrying secrets away into the gutters. Inside, the little cafe smelled of warm bread and fresh coffee, as though nothing unusual had happened. But in Sophia's heart, a quiet shift had already begun. That evening, after locking up, she walked home with tired feet and a heavier heart than usual. Daniel met her at the door, asking about dinner, about school books he needed. She smiled, hiding her exhaustion, hiding the worries she carried. But as she set the kettle on the stove and listened to the rain tapping against the window, her mind drifted back to the stranger. His eyes, his silence, the way he had looked at her after she gave him that coffee. She didn't know his name. She didn't know his story, but something told her she hadn't seen the last of him. The next morning was brighter. The rain had stopped, leaving behind damp streets that shimmered under the soft sunlight. Sophia arrived at the cafe early, just as she always did, carrying a fresh bundle of newspapers under her arm. She unlocked the door, switched on the lights, and inhaled the familiar smell of roasted beans. Despite her weariness, the cafe was the one place where she felt in control, her little world where she could pour her energy into serving others. As she arranged pastries in the glass case, she wondered if she would see the mysterious man again. A part of her told her not to expect it. Maybe he had only come in because of the rain. Maybe he had been embarrassed about not being able to pay. Customers sometimes vanished after moments like that, never to return. She tried to push the thought out of her mind, but just as the morning rush began to fade and the cafe grew quiet again, the door opened. It was him, the same man, tall and reserved, stepping inside with his hands in his pockets. His eyes still carried that quiet heaviness, but this time there was something different, something softer. He walked up to the counter, and Sophia felt a flicker of nervousness she couldn't explain. Without looking up fully, he said, "A black coffee, please." This time, when she slid the cup across the counter, he placed a crisp bill beside it. "For today," he said simply. She smiled. "And for yesterday," she teased gently. A small curve touched his lips, the closest thing to a smile she had seen from him. He nodded once, then carried the cup to his usual spot by the window. Sophia found herself watching him again as he sat there, staring outside, as if the world beyond the glass held all the answers to his questions. The hours passed, and he stayed longer than most customers. When she walked over to clear a nearby table, she noticed that his coffee was nearly gone. She hesitated, then asked softly, "Would you like a refill?" He looked up at her, startled, as though pulled from some deep thought. After a pause, he shook his head. "No, thank you." His voice was low, polite, but distant, as if he were guarding himself. Sophia nodded, returning to the counter. Yet the encounter left her more curious than before. Who was this man who dressed so well but carried so much sadness? Why did he sit alone every time, watching the rain or the street, hardly saying a word to anyone? The next day he returned again, and the day after that. Slowly a pattern formed. Every morning, almost at the same hour, he walked in. He ordered the same black coffee. He sat by the same window, and he left in the same quiet way, offering her only a nod before disappearing through the door. At first, she thought it was coincidence. Then she realized it wasn't. He had made the cafe part of his daily life, and though he spoke little, his presence filled the room in a way she couldn't ignore. Sophia began to notice small details. He always wore a watch with a leather strap, polished but worn at the edges. He carried a pen in his pocket, though she never saw him write anything. Sometimes he rubbed his temples as if fighting a headache. Other times he leaned forward, lost in thought, his fingers tracing the rim of his cup. She wanted to ask questions, but something held her back. Perhaps it was respect for his silence, or perhaps it was the fear of discovering something she wasn't ready to know. So she kept her curiosity hidden behind a polite smile and kind gestures, offering a fresh napkin, remembering exactly how hot he liked his coffee, and making sure his favorite seat was always clean. One evening, as she wiped down the counter while preparing to close, she realized he was still sitting there. Most customers had long since gone home, but he remained, staring at the fading light outside. Finally, he stood and walked toward her. "You're kind," he said suddenly. The words startled her. She looked up, unsure if she'd heard correctly. "Most people," he continued slowly, "wouldn't have given me that coffee for free. Not when I didn't have the money." "But you did," Sophia felt her cheeks warm. "It was just a cup of coffee," she said lightly, though something in his tone made her realize it had meant far more to him. "Not to me," he replied. His gaze was steady now, though still shadowed by sorrow. "You gave me something I didn't know I needed that day." For a moment the cafe felt completely still. Sophia didn't know what to say. She had served hundreds of customers over the years, given out free drinks here and there, smiled at strangers without thinking twice. But never had anyone looked at her as though she had given them something priceless. He seemed about to say more, but then he stopped himself. With a slight nod, he walked out, leaving her standing behind the counter with her heart racing. That night, she lay awake in her small bed, staring at the ceiling. His words replayed in her mind again and again. "You gave me something I didn't know I needed." She didn't understand what he meant, but she knew it wasn't about the coffee. As the days turned into weeks, his visits became something she quietly anticipated. She never admitted it aloud, not even to herself, but she looked forward to the sound of the door opening at that exact time, to the calm rhythm of his footsteps, to the brief exchange of words at the counter. It became part of her routine, something steady in a world that often felt uncertain, and yet his silence remained. He never shared his story, never explained the sadness in his eyes, but the mystery only drew her in more. She couldn't help but wonder, who was he really? A businessman? A writer? Someone running from a broken past? Every evening, when she closed the cafe and walked home through the quiet streets, she found herself replaying their encounters. She tried to tell herself not to care, not to let curiosity consume her. He was just another customer. But deep down, she knew there was something unusual about him, something important. She didn't know it yet. But the man by the window was about to change her life in ways she could never have imagined. The rain had returned, heavier this time, drumming against the cafe windows like an impatient hand. The day had been slow, and Sophia found herself wiping the same spot on the counter over and over, more out of distraction than necessity. The warm glow of the lamps inside contrasted sharply with the storm outside, but the cafe felt emptier than usual. Only a few customers had come in during the morning, and by the time evening approached, most tables sat vacant. The man by the window was there again, as he had been almost every day. His presence had become so routine that Sophia hardly had to ask any more. She simply brewed his black coffee as soon as he walked through the door. He always thanked her quietly, always sat in the same place, and always left without giving away much of himself. Yet tonight felt different. His posture was heavier, his eyes darker, his silence deeper than usual. Sophia finished wiping the counter, hesitated for a moment, then decided to break her own rule of distance. She carried a small plate with a complimentary biscotti and placed it gently on his table. "For you," she said, trying to sound casual. He looked up startled. "I didn't order this." "I know," she replied with a small shrug, "but it goes well with coffee." For the first time, a faint chuckle escaped him. It was short, almost hesitant, but it was enough to change the air between them. He studied her for a moment, then asked something he had never asked before. "Do you like working here?" The question caught her off guard. Most customers never asked about her life. She was the barista, the one behind the counter, invisible outside of her role. She fumbled for an answer. I like coffee, and I like people," she said carefully. Then she sighed, letting a bit of honesty slip through. "But the cafe might not be around much longer. Business isn't good." He tilted his head. "And if it closes?" She gave a nervous laugh, trying to mask her fear. "Then I'll figure something out. I always do." But her eyes betrayed the truth. She was tired, uncertain, weighed down by responsibilities too heavy for her age. She expected him to nod politely and return to his silence, but instead he leaned forward slightly, his gaze piercing. "What if you owned this cafe?" he asked quietly. The words hung in the air, so unexpected that for a moment she thought she had misheard. She blinked at him, searching his face for a trace of humor, but he wasn't smiling. His expression was calm, serious. "Me?" She laughed nervously. "I can barely afford rent. Owning a cafe? That's impossible." "Why impossible?" His voice was steady, but there was something intense about the way he asked. Sophia shook her head, still half laughing, half defensive. "Because dreams like that don't come true for people like me. I'm just trying to get by." For a long moment he didn't reply. He only looked at her, as if studying her carefully, as though weighing something important in his mind. Then he leaned back, took a sip of his coffee, and said nothing more. The conversation left Sophia rattled. She returned to the counter, her heart racing. Why would he ask her something like that? What did he mean by it? The cafe was failing. She knew that much. The owner had been open about selling, but she had never allowed herself to imagine being anything more than an employee. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. As the storm raged outside, the silence between them grew heavier. Sophia tried to distract herself by cleaning and counting the till, but her mind kept circling back to his strange question. She wanted to dismiss it as idle curiosity, but deep down she sensed there was more behind it. When the clock struck closing time, she walked over to tell him gently that they were shutting down. But before she could speak, he looked up and said, "What would you do with this place if it were yours?" She froze. The way he asked wasn't casual this time. His eyes were fixed on hers, steady and serious. She stammered, caught off guard. Then, almost without thinking, she let her imagination spill out. "I'd paint the walls a lighter color, add more bookshelves, maybe start hosting small open mic nights, music, poetry, make it a place where people feel like they belong, not just where they buy coffee and leave." She laughed nervously, realizing she was rambling. "But that's just silly. None of that will ever happen." To her surprise, he didn't smile at her words. Instead, he nodded slowly, as though committing every detail to memory. "It's not silly," he said softly. "It's vision." Her cheeks warmed. She didn't know how to respond, so she muttered something about cleaning up and walked away. But his words echoed in her head long after he left. That night, Sophia lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her thoughts restless. His questions kept replaying in her mind. What if you owned this cafe? What would you do with this place if it were yours? It was ridiculous, she told herself. Just words. He didn't mean anything by them, but still, She couldn't shake the feeling that something about the way he had looked at her carried weight. Over the following days, his visits continued, but his demeanor seemed different now. He studied her more closely, asked occasional questions about the cafe, how long she had worked there, how many employees it had, even about the menu. She answered politely, though confusion lingered in her mind. Why was he so interested? And then there was the moment that unsettled her most. One evening, as she handed him his usual coffee, he looked at her with quiet intensity and said, "You have no idea what you've given me." She frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" But he only shook his head, as if the answer was too complicated, too personal to share. Sophia tried to brush it off, but deep down she knew that something was building. A change was coming, though she couldn't yet see its shape. She didn't know that the man sitting quietly by the window wasn't just another customer. She didn't know his name carried power, that his world stretched far beyond the small cafe. And she had no way of knowing that soon, her life, once so predictable, so ordinary, was about to be rewritten by the very man she had given a free cup of coffee. The morning began like any other. Sophia opened the cafe, brewed the first pot of coffee, and arranged the pastries in neat rows. She was tired from another sleepless night of worrying about bills, but she pushed a smile onto her face the way she always did. Smiles were part of her job. People came here not just for caffeine, but for warmth, for the comfort of being greeted by someone who seemed to care. When the door opened, she looked up expecting to see the familiar figure of the quiet man. But this time he wasn't alone. Two men in crisp suits followed behind him, carrying folders and briefcases. The air shifted instantly. Their presence felt out of place in the small cafe, with its scratched tables and humming refrigerator. Customers at the nearby tables glanced up curiously before returning to their drinks. Sophia blinked, trying to hide her surprise. He walked toward the counter with the same calm expression, but his eyes seemed sharper now, more focused. "Good morning," he said, his voice carrying more authority than she had ever noticed before. "Good morning," she replied, still unsettled. "The usual?" He nodded, and she quickly poured his black coffee. But instead of heading straight to his seat by the window, he stayed at the counter. The two men in suits moved toward a table, opening their folders, flipping through papers. It was so unusual that Sophia couldn't keep her curiosity from spilling out. "Are they with you?" she asked quietly. "Yes," he said simply. Then after a pause he added, "We'll need a moment of your time today." Her hands froze around the cup she was wiping. "My time?" He gave a small nod, then walked over to the table where the men waited. They spread out documents, speaking in low tones. Sophia's heart quickened. She didn't understand what was happening, but instinct told her this was more than just coffee. Minutes later, he gestured for her to join them. Nervous, she untied her apron and approached the table. She felt out of place, standing before three well-dressed men with serious expressions and polished shoes. One of them slid a thick folder toward her. "Miss," the man by the window began, his tone formal now, "I think it's time I told you who I am." Sophia's breath caught. He had always been a mystery, a stranger cloaked in silence. Now, as he looked directly at her, there was no trace of hesitation. "My name is Adrian Hale," he said steadily. "I'm the CEO of Hale & Co., a real estate and investment firm." The words hit her like a wave. She had heard that name before, everyone had. Hale & Co. was one of the largest companies in the city, owning towers, shopping centers, entire blocks of land. It was a name that carried wealth, influence, and power. She stared at him, stunned into silence. The man she had given a free coffee 2 weeks ago wasn't just some sad stranger. He was a billionaire. "I didn't tell you before because I didn't want to be treated differently," he continued. "For once I wanted to sit somewhere as just a man, not as a CEO, not as someone with money, just someone who needed a moment of peace." Sophia's knees felt weak. She gripped the back of a chair to steady herself. I don't understand. Why are you telling me this?" Adrian's eyes softened. "Because you changed something in me. That day I came in with nothing, When I thought I'd lost everything that mattered, you handed me a cup of coffee. No judgment, no hesitation. That kindness." He paused, as though searching for the right words. "It reminded me of something I hadn't felt in years. Humanity, simplicity, a reason to keep going." Her throat tightened. She didn't know what to say. She had only done what felt natural. But to him, it had meant more than she could have imagined. Then came the moment that would alter her life forever. Adrian placed a hand on the folder and pushed it gently toward her. "I've bought this cafe." Sophia's eyes widened. "You... what?" "I finalized the deal this morning," he explained. "The papers are here. The cafe is yours now." She shook her head quickly, almost laughing. No, this has to be a mistake." "I can't. This cafe isn't. Why would you—" "Because you deserve it," he interrupted firmly. His tone carried both conviction and warmth. "I've seen the way you care for this place. The way you treat every customer as if they matter. The way you keep smiling even when you're exhausted. You gave me more than coffee. You gave me hope when I had none. And I want to give you the chance to build something greater." Tears welled in her eyes. She pressed her hand to her mouth, unable to stop them. Around her, the cafe seemed to blur. I don't know how to run a business," she whispered. "That's why you'll have help," he assured her. "These men are my advisors. They'll guide you with the transition. But the vision, the heart of this place, that's yours. You already have what money can't buy." Her chest tightened, her heart thundering. It was too much, too sudden. Just yesterday, she'd been worrying about paying rent, about losing her job. And now, a man she barely knew was placing ownership of the cafe in her hands. Adrian leaned closer, lowering his voice. "I don't expect you to understand right away, but believe me, this is no accident. The day you handed me that coffee, you gave me something I couldn't put a price on. I want you to have the chance to build the life you dream of. Don't say no out of fear. Say yes because you deserve more than survival." Her vision blurred with tears. She looked at the folder in front of her, at the official papers stamped with signatures, at her own name written in black ink. A part of her wanted to push it away, to run from the weight of it all. But another part, the part that had dreamed secretly of something more, of turning the cafe into a place alive with warmth and creativity, longed to believe. The cafe was quiet around them, the storm still raging outside. Sophia realized in that moment that her life was standing at a crossroads. She had a choice: cling to fear or step into something she had never imagined possible. Her trembling hand reached for the folder. She didn't sign, not yet, but simply touched the papers as though testing whether they were real. Adrian watched her carefully, his eyes calm, but filled with something she hadn't noticed before: hope. And just like that, Sophia's world began to shift. The days following Adrian's revelation felt like a dream Sophia couldn't wake from. Each morning, she expected to return to the cafe as an employee, tying her apron and waiting for orders to come in. But instead, she now walked through the door with papers that bore her name as the legal owner. The first time she saw it stamped officially, her hands trembled so much she almost dropped the folder. Her name, in bold ink, tied to the little cafe on the corner of 5th Street. She kept expecting someone to tell her it was all a mistake, that the deal had fallen through, that she didn't belong in this role. But no one did. Adrian had kept his word. He visited often, sometimes alone, sometimes with advisors who explained things in patient detail: how to manage inventory, track expenses, and think about long-term growth. Sophia listened carefully, her notebook filling with scribbles. She wasn't used to this kind of responsibility. But the fire inside her, the dream she had never dared to speak aloud, was suddenly alive. The first change she made was simple. She repainted the walls a softer, brighter color, one that reflected light and made the space feel welcoming instead of dim. She moved furniture around, creating cozy corners with second-hand chairs she bought cheaply but restored with care. Then she added shelves filled with donated books, inviting customers to read while they sipped their coffee. It wasn't grand or expensive, but it felt personal. When customers noticed, they began to ask questions. "You redecorating?" one man asked. Sophia hesitated, then answered with pride, "Actually, I own the place now." The words felt strange on her tongue, almost too heavy, but the smile that spread across her face made them real. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood. People who had passed by without a second glance began stopping in, curious to meet the young woman who had gone from barista to owner overnight. The story carried a spark of inspiration, and soon the cafe wasn't just serving drinks, it was serving hope. Daniel, her younger brother, couldn't believe it when she told him. "Wait, you own the cafe? Like actually own it?" His wide eyes were filled with both disbelief and admiration. "Yes," she said, still not fully believing it herself. "It's ours now." "Well, mine, but ours too. You'll always have a place here." He hugged her tightly, and for the first time in years, Sophia felt she was giving him more than survival. She was giving him a future, but ownership wasn't easy. Bills still arrived, rent still needed to be paid, and employees still looked to her for direction. There were nights she stayed awake, buried in receipts, fighting the creeping fear that she would fail. But each time she doubted herself, Adrian appeared, sometimes with advice, sometimes with nothing more than a steady presence. He often sat at his usual spot by the window, sipping his black coffee, watching her with quiet encouragement. She came to realize that his silence was not emptiness, but attentiveness. He was a man used to carrying the world on his shoulders, and somehow, in the little cafe, he allowed himself to put it down, even just for an hour. One evening, after closing, he stayed behind. The chairs were stacked, the lights dimmed, and Sophia was sweeping the floor. Adrian's voice broke the silence. "You've changed this place already," he said. She glanced up. "It's just paint and furniture." "No," he corrected gently. "It's heart. People feel it the moment they walk in." His words struck her more deeply than she expected. She lowered her gaze, gripping the broom tighter. "Sometimes I don't know if I can do this. It feels too big for me." Adrian stood, moving closer. "You can," he said firmly, "because you care. That's the one thing money can't buy, and it's the one thing that makes a business last." Their eyes met, and for a brief moment the air between them shifted. Sophia quickly looked away, focusing on the broom, but her heart beat faster. In the weeks that followed, Sophia began implementing more of her ideas. She hosted a small open mic night, inviting local musicians and poets. To her surprise, people filled the cafe, their voices blending with the smell of coffee and baked bread. The laughter and applause brought a warmth that reminded her of family dinners long ago, before life became so hard. She looked around that night and felt a surge of pride. The cafe wasn't just surviving, it was alive. Adrian was there too, seated quietly in the corner, but she caught him smiling as he watched the performances. It was the first time she had seen a real smile stretch across his face, and it softened him, made him look less like a powerful CEO and more like a man rediscovering joy. Yet even as things improved, Sophia couldn't shake the question that lingered in her mind. Why her? Why had Adrian chosen to buy the cafe and hand it to her? A young woman with no money, no connections, no experience. One evening, unable to hold back, she asked him directly, "Why me?" She said softly, sitting across from him after the cafe closed. "You could have given this cafe to anyone, or kept it for yourself. Why choose me?" Adrian looked down at his coffee, swirling it slowly before answering. "Because you gave me something I couldn't find anywhere else. The day I walked in here, I was lost. My father had just died. I had everything money could buy, but nothing that mattered. And then you—" He paused, his eyes meeting hers. "You gave me a cup of coffee without asking for anything in return. It wasn't about the coffee. It was about seeing me when I felt invisible. You reminded me that kindness still exists." Her throat tightened. She remembered that day clearly, but she had never imagined the depth of what it meant to him. Adrian's voice lowered. "I've built towers and empires, but they've never filled the emptiness. This little cafe did more for me than all of that. And I wanted to make sure the person who gave me that gift had the chance to build something meaningful." Tears filled her eyes. She wanted to thank him, but the words felt too small. Instead, she simply nodded, her heart swelling with gratitude and something else she couldn't quite name. As the months rolled on, the cafe blossomed. The once struggling business became a hub for the community. Students came to study, parents gathered with children, artists shared their talents, and neighbors who rarely spoke before now greeted each other warmly. Sophia poured herself into every detail, learning quickly, making mistakes, but always pushing forward. Adrian's visits never stopped. He became a fixture, not as the billionaire CEO, but as the man who always ordered a black coffee and sat by the window. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they sat in comfortable silence. A bond grew between them, unspoken but undeniable. One night, as the cafe closed after a particularly busy day, Sophia stood at the window, looking out at the streetlights. "It's funny," she said quietly, "how everything can change because of one small moment." Adrian, standing beside her, replied, "That's how life works. The smallest acts often carry the biggest weight." She turned to him, her eyes reflecting both wonder and disbelief. "All of this, it started with just one free cup of coffee," he smiled, "and this time it wasn't faint or fleeting. It was real, warm, and filled with something unspoken." The cafe lights glowed softly behind them, casting warmth into the quiet street. Inside, the smell of fresh coffee lingered, mingling with the echoes of laughter and conversation from earlier in the evening. And in that moment, Sophia realized she wasn't just the poor barista anymore. She was the heart of something much greater, something that had begun with kindness and grown into a story that would be told for years. She had no idea what the future held, whether Adrian's presence in her life would remain as just friendship or something more, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty. Her life had been transformed, not by luck, not by money, but by the simple choice to give freely, without expecting anything in return. And that truth, as powerful as any fortune, would stay with her forever. One free cup of coffee turned into a life-changing miracle. This story shows us that even the smallest act of kindness can create the biggest transformations. What about you? Do you believe kindness can change lives? Let us know in the comments below. Tell us where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if this story touched your heart, don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories. Your support helps us bring you more true life miracles. Until next time, stay kind, because you never know whose life you might change.